The average child today consumes over 65 pounds of added sugar every single year. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me again. My name is Dr. Mark Shankman. I'm an oral and maxillofacial surgeon that developed a new interest in obesity and created this obesity project. So today, episode 11, from playgrounds to pounds, why childhood obesity is skyrocketing. So the hard truth is that child obesity is no longer just about being a chubby kid. It's a full-blown health crisis, and it's starting earlier and earlier than it ever was in the past. And we have truly a generation at risk right now. If we look at the history of things, in the 1980s, childhood obesity was pretty rare. Um, it was really just the occasional kid. And now nearly 1 in 5 kids in the US is obese. And type 2 diabetes, which was once called adult onset diabetes, is now becoming more increasingly common in children. And this was absolutely unheard of just 10, 15 years ago. And then this is not just a problem in teenage years. This is not just a problem in later childhood. This is a problem right from in utero. So babies are being born predisposed to obesity now. And it's not just about what kids eat. It's actually starting in the womb. So let's talk about this a little bit. So studies show that mothers with high insulin levels during pregnancy are essentially bathing their unborn children in higher insulin levels, which then leads to higher fat storage tendencies in their babies. And babies exposed to high blood sugar in the womb are much more likely to develop insulin resistance as children. And this cycle continues as these children grow up surrounded by ultra processed, insulin spiking foods. And as I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, that genetics plays a big role in this. And you might say to yourself, well, if you take a child who's from a heavyset group of people or parents, and you put them into a lean family as an adopted child, you might expect, if it's more environmentally based, that those children would grow up relatively thin. And the reality is, there's about a 70% likelihood that those children will grow up much like their parents. And now this really explains how that happens. So the mother has high insulin levels during pregnancy. They have higher blood sugar in the womb, the children, and they develop more insulin resistance. They have a tendency toward fat storage, and so the cycle continues. So that's the genetic component, but there is also a dietary component as well. And childhood diets have actually changed quite a bit, as have their bodies. So kids used to eat real food. They used to eat unprocessed whole foods, and now they're surrounded by what you see behind me. They're surrounded by sugary cereals. They're surrounded by fast foods and snacks. Lunchrooms are also filled with very high carb, ultra processed meals. So all of these meals are made from flour and sugar and all these refined carbohydrates that get ultra processed and easily absorbed, spiking insulin levels, creating fat gain and weight gain. And then one of the worst culprits, as I talked about in the last video, is soft drinks and juice boxes, which have essentially replaced water in the schools. So let's talk a little bit about what the science actually says. And we're going to talk about insulin and childhood obesity. So there was a key study back in 2018 where kids were shown to, I'm sorry, let me back up a minute. Kids today are producing more insulin than they ever have been, and the insulin is the fat storage hormone. So as I said in the in utero thing, that the kids have more insulin, and that insulin triggers fat storage. So in this 2018 study, they showed that obese children have significantly higher insulin levels than normal weight kids. And another study found that high insulin levels in young children do correlate and predict obesity later in life. And we talked about this previously. We know that the earlier you develop obesity, the more difficult it's going to be to lose that extra weight in adulthood. So the bottom line, just like for adults, happens in kids, more insulin equals more fat storage, which means a higher weight set point. And as we mentioned in earlier videos, the higher your insulin levels kind of sets that set weight point up higher and higher and higher. So what creates the set point for your body to maintain a certain weight is your insulin level. So the higher insulin levels, the higher insulin resistance, the higher insulin resistance, the higher insulin levels we get again, this vicious cycle, which drives that set point up and up and up, which is why we continue to gain weight. So this is why the just move more and eat less philosophy that was pushed in the late 70s and through the 80s and 90s simply doesn't work for childhood obesity. So if insulin stays high, the body is lacked in a fat storage system. So this isn't kids today are just lazier. There are less opportunities for kids to move, but this isn't just a move more, eat less phenomenon of kids today versus kids 30 years ago. So if it's not a move more, eat less situation, then why is this happening? And as I mentioned previously, it's really the primary causative factor is these ultra processed carbs, and sugar is absolutely everywhere. It's in your soda, it's in your processed foods, even processed meals that might not be sugary there's tons of added sugar added to it to make it more palatable, to make it more appetizing, and to make it more addictive. So the average child today consumes over 65 pounds of added sugar every single year. And, so if we're talking about processed carbs and we're talking about sugar, we're talking about insulin bombs. We're creating these insulin bombs in these kids where their insulin levels never have an opportunity to come down. And then there's also the eat every 2 to 3 hour myth that came about when we had the food pyramid in the late 70s, talked about eating many more carbs and eat a low fat diet. And this created this process where you ate a lot more carbohydrate. And here's what happens when you eat more carbohydrate. If you eat protein and fat, I don't know why English became a second language today. If you eat more protein and fat, you're going to stay more satiated. You're going to remain more full, and you're going to basically eat 2 to 3 meals a day. But what happens when you eat all these processed carbohydrates, they get absorbed so quickly that your blood sugar spikes. Insulin drives that blood sugar down and you crash. And then 2 to maybe 3 hours later, you're absolutely starving because you've got now no energy in your blood. You've got no blood sugar to provide energy to your body. And so your brain kind of triggers the hunger hormone, ghrelin, to fire up and get you to eat more. And so you wind up eating snacks much more often. So you might eat breakfast at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then about 10 o'clock, you might be ravenous and want to eat a snack. And then you eat lunch at 12:30, and then at 1:30 or 2, you start to crash and you then reach for another sugary or low fat, say bran muffin or something like that, which is essentially a piece of cake, right? So you eat that snack, you then eat your dinner because you're starving again. And then, sometime before bed, you get a little bit hungry and you want a little snack before bed. And so you have a snack. So now you're eating pretty much every 2 to 3 hours, but you're eating sometimes 5, 6, 7 times a day. And so what this does is all this snacking all day long keeps those insulin levels really elevated. And that constant cycle of eating and insulin spike and shove it into fat storage and blood sugar drops and you get hungry and repeat, all fuels obesity. And this happens in adults and in children. So skipping snacks and eating very well-balanced meals reduces insulin exposure and helps regulate appetite, which then keeps you more full. You eat less, you eat better, you eat more whole foods, all of these things, and everything improves. So the third thing that is a reason for childhood obesity is because of the lack of real nutrition. So as I just touched on, processed foods basically have replaced whole foods simply because we live very busy lives. Breakfast in particular is very inconvenient. People are on the go. They got to get their kids to school. They got to get to work. So what do? You grab something that's quick and easy. What's quick and easy? Highly processed foods. And so if you had less processed foods or whole foods, you would actually do much better. So protein and healthy fats keep kids full and regulate the insulin. Also, instead of schools pushing low-fat, high-carb diets, they should be pushing these high-protein, high-fat, low-carbohydrate, low-processed carbohydrate diets, which is exactly so when you push those high carb diets, that's exactly what fuels the insulin resistance. So if we eat processed foods, we have high insulin. If we eat whole foods, even if those whole foods are carbohydrates, let's say you take a piece of fruit, that fruit has sugar in it, that's going to spike insulin, but you're also going to get all the fiber, all the protein, all the stuff that comes with that fruit, which will decrease the absorption and decrease the sugar spike. So we cannot completely ignore the fact that kids are moving less. As I mentioned, it's not the sole reason, it's not even the primary reason, but kids have more screen time, less movement. Kids spend roughly about 7+ hours a day on their screen, less time outside, less physical activity. And that's going to certainly, factor in. It's a lower factor point when you're considering weight gain or obesity than some of the other problems that come from less physical activity. But exercise does help lower insulin levels. And with kids moving less and less, they get less exercise. It's not going to lower those insulin levels the way that kids back 30 years ago moved around a lot more, and those insulin levels were given an opportunity to come down. So what's the future? What do we need to do to break the cycle? This isn't about blaming parents, right? I'm not out there saying parents are the problem, parents are the fault. This is about fixing a broken and a toxic food system. That's really what this boils down to. We got to get rid of these processed foods. We've got to start eating a more whole food diet, whether you're doing low carbohydrate, whether you're doing, whatever dietary choice you make, whether it's vegan, vegetarian, keto, carnivore, paleo, Atkins, whatever diet you're using is not really the main issue. It's about fixing the food system, reducing processed carbs, reducing simple sugars, focusing on real foods. And real foods includes fruit, but focusing on the real food and protein and healthy fats. Those are the main areas that we need to focus on. So we need to let kids eat when they're truly hungry, not just because it's snack time, not just because they came home from school and you said now you need to get a nice healthy snack. You need to, if a kid is not hungry, that's their body telling them it's not time to eat. You have plenty of energy, and feeding them a snack is simply going to ruin their meal, and they're going to eat poorer during mealtime. And it's also giving them an abundance of calories to take in that they don't need. And of course, when those calories are processed foods, we know what happens with the insulin levels. We need to also teach kids about insulin and how food affects their body. For younger kids, you're not going to necessarily go into insulin, but you might say, look, that sugary drink is going to cause you to store fat, and it's going to cause you to get fatter. If they know that fast food is not healthy, but a fruit is, or if they know that a pizza, not super healthy, but a nice steak is, then that's going to go a long way to teaching them what foods are good for them and what foods are not. And then, of course, we need to encourage movement, less screen time, more outdoor play. I don't know, back in my day, you were, thrown outside a Saturday morning, and, you just needed to be home by dinner time. And, things are very different now. Obviously, there's much more supervision. My parents didn't know where I was all day long. That has certainly changed. But as a result of some of that, what's also happened is we have had much less outdoor play as a result. So, have you noticed how childhood obesity has changed over the years? And what do you think is the biggest problem? I want you to drop a comment down below. I'd love to respond to those comments and maybe pick up some ideas for future videos. So we need to share this to help parents understand what's really happening. This isn't a problem where we're blaming the parents. This is a broken food system. This is a busy life. This is, technology, creating more screen time. This is less outdoor play. This is snacks. This is bad dietary guidelines. It's all of these things together that has created obesity in adults, but also obesity in children. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, the way that the parents go is the way that the kids go. So it's really important that we break this cycle. We get in there and we explain to people, both the parents and the kids, so that they understand this process much better. So thank you so much for watching. Once again, I appreciate you taking the time to watch these videos. Hopefully you learned something. If you did, please like, share, and comment. Make sure you subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next one.